Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
So, on behalf of Chief Manuel Morales, I want to thank you all for inviting me here today. I'm a huge fan of the Rotary Club and your storied history, in particular in Miami, as a lifelong resident, born and raised here in Magic City. I sincerely appreciate your service over the entirety of my life. You've made an enormous difference. I'd also like to thank my friend Steve for helping bring me here today. So I'm going to be talking to you today about future planning for public safety. And so what do you mean by public safety future planning? So sometimes you hear about this sort of thing. You hear a number of words being tossed around. So we hear about risks and threats, and people use those interchangeably, but they don't really mean the same thing. So a risk is something that is likely to cause harm. Right? And a threat is the potential harm a threat is the thing that's likely to cause harm, and the risk is the potential harm that's posed by that threat. And often when we think about what police departments do, right, you think about officers on patrol and you think of that force presence, and really what people consider is risk mitigation, right? So how do we make it so that we just don't have those risks in a space? That's what high visibility patrol work is for, right? You have officers in place to discourage problematic events from occurring. And then sometimes we hear this other word, which is resilience, right? And sometimes in the public sector we hear it as resiliency, which is kind of a fake word, right? It's really resilience. And so what resilience is the ability to withstand those threats. And the fact is that you can't mitigate every risk out there in the world. So you have to make sure that your community is resilient enough to withstand those impacts when a problematic event occurs. So public safety planning, when we're looking towards the future, is really about developing practices for minimizing the community's risk exposure while improving its resiliency to those impacts that it cannot mitigate. So what does our safety landscape look like in Miami? Well, right now things are pretty good. Right, in terms of both per capita and absolute crime, our violent crime is at the lowest level that it's ever been. Right, it almost makes me nervous sometimes because you have to posit that there's an absolute crime floor below which crime cannot fall, and we are more than likely nearing it. Homicides are at their lowest rate adjusted for population ever. Violent crime is very, very low. We do have property crime, which now we're able to leverage some of our resources to address. So right now, things are pretty good for people who live in Miami. You won't necessarily know that from looking at social media, right? I think the role of social media is to make us all very anxious. But in meaningful, real terms, you're safer today in the city of Miami than at any point, at least in my life. And I grew up in the 80s. Having said that, there's no guarantee that those conditions are going to exist in perpetuity. And in fact, we have to think that communities go through change, right? We've seen communities change over the course of our lives. Some cities have ups and downs. I look at Detroit and Chicago and New York and San Francisco, and I look at how those communities have changed and how the crime landscape in those communities have changed over the course of my lifetime, and how indeed Miami has changed as well. So there are two things that we really think about. The first one is critical incidents. Right, so critical incidents are those low frequency but very high impact events that you hear about in the news. Those are your active shooter, active killer events, these are active terrorism. But they're also severe weather events, right? You got a tornado strike, you got that hurricane that is the Category 5 storm with a storm surge that winds up striking the community, like we saw in the Panhandle just a couple of years ago, to devastating effect. And so we really think in terms of those really high impact events, but you've also got what I think of as persistent or structural crime. That's a part of the community landscape, and this is crime that really affects everybody, right? So, and we can think of those in different categories. We can think of those quality of life crimes, right? The folks who are vandalizing buildings in the area, or they're leaving trash everywhere, right? Your overall quality of life is impacted by that kind of crime. And then you've got property crimes, burglaries, thefts, things of that nature. And then you've got your violent crimes. And that's really what we tend to focus around, at least in major cities. So when we think about how we plan for the future, we're really thinking about how we mitigate or build resilience around those two categories of things, right? Critical events and persistent crime. And so I want to talk about first critical incident resilience. So I'm not sure if any of you have had the opportunity to visit our real-time crime center. So my police department has all kinds of really exciting technologies. So in the 80s, we were the first agency in the country to have automated fingerprint identification. And so we continue to have a number of innovative projects that come online through our agency. Right now, our real-time crime center hosts hundreds of surveillance camera feeds and dozens of license plate readers deployed strategically throughout the city. And I know that makes some people nervous, right? From a civil rights perspective, you want to make sure that your government is not always monitoring you. And I'm here to tell you that it is impossible to monitor you. So having hundreds of cameras does not mean that you have hundreds of officers to perpetually view those cameras. And the research tells us that even the most highly trained officer can only maintain their attention on a camera feed for about 15 minutes at a time, let alone hundreds of feeds to choose from. So why then do we have so many of these cameras? What's the value of them? And I would submit to you that there's not really a lot of proactive value to having those cameras right now. I'd say that there's a lot of reactive value. So when we're doing an investigation, it's an incredible resource for us. As a former homicide detective, I can tell you that if you've got video of an incident, it's a huge relief, especially now that there are fewer and fewer people willing to come forward as witnesses to testify in court. It's very handy to have an objective piece of evidence that we can present. But no, that's an after the fact thing, right? What we are hoping to get to with our real-time crime center is to actually be working in real time. And so to be able to leverage a robust camera infrastructure like that, we really need to be able to utilize computer systems that can algorithmically identify problematic events. And we have algorithms like that, right? We have algorithms which can count objects in video streams. We already have this, right? We have algorithms that can show you where you have soft target densities developing. We have algorithms which can identify when a man with a red shirt is seen in a camera in your feed. Having said that, though, those algorithms are incredibly expensive. Right? So the development process around building one of those video analytics systems means that you have to train an AI engine around it. So I'm sure some of you maybe use ChatGPT. That's sort of the craze right now. You put in a prompt and ChatGPT does your homework for you. Really remarkable piece of technology. And so the way that works, and really all machine learning systems work by using a scoring algorithm that just runs across hundreds of graphics processing units. And it just keeps on running until it starts to look right. So it's brute forcing. They say that it's artificial intelligence, but it's really not. The computers themselves are quite dumb. But they sort of mimic intelligence in the way that your parrot can mimic your speech. And so it's expensive to develop these systems, and for law enforcement agencies to utilize them, you wind up having to pay a premium. And so that premium winds up being passed on to the taxpayer. My concern, and it's the same concern that I have with the way that the body-worn cameras have gone. Right now, there's effectively a monopoly on body-worn camera. There's really one company that provides body-worn cameras to law enforcement agencies now, I think, globally. And so you've got one vendor who can dictate pricing to you. I worry that similar things are happening in other spaces when we stop investing as a public sector in the development of these tools. So what I would like to see is the development of open source video analytics systems that allow agencies across the country to build these kinds of capabilities and leverage them across their existing camera infrastructure without having to make an enormous investment. And so to that end, I've been talking to our partners over at Miami-Dade College. So I had no idea. So when I became the downtown commander, I did my meet and greet with the folks over at Miami-Dade. They have like a whole artificial intelligence lab now. They have programs that are built around cybersecurity and other things, and it's really exciting because most of the students that they're getting are not, and this actually ties into the second part of my presentation, but most of the students that they're getting are not fresh out of high school. These are people who are moving on to their second or third career and are pivoting into a technology role. So I mention this because we're working on putting together a project where we actually use some of the resources that they have at Miami-Dade, and we start training against the camera feeds that we have to start building some of these capabilities. And so one of the capabilities that I'd like to see, particularly because we're in a coastal area, is flood detection. So it's an issue that affects everyone, right? I mean, if you live in Brickell or Edgewater, and after the last storm, Edgewater was really just the water. We'd love to be able to do live alerts when we start to see that those waters are rising, so that we can shut down streets and not leave people stranded. Long-term projects would be when we have shootings that are originating from high rises, doing the muzzle flash detection, so that we can immediately identify which apartment is the source of the gunfire. And so the capabilities are there, right? But in practical terms, we can't reach them because we just can't afford to buy all of these things. So if we can't afford to buy them all, why not build them? And that's my hope in partnering with some of our academic institutions to be able to develop that capability so that we can rapidly respond and mitigate the long-term impact of having an unaddressed shooter or an unaddressed flooding event in the area. So the other thing, and this is sort of an unusual space for a police officer to get into, but I'd like to talk about the economy for a moment. So we talked about critical events, but persistent crime is much less developed, is much less premised on exposure to these kinds of critical events than it is to overall weaknesses in the economic landscape of the community. And so Miami's doing very well right now. And Miami's doing well largely on the strength of its real estate market, right? And so there's a fragility there, a real fragility. And should there be an impact to those real estate values, we're going to have a large inventory of housing which is going to be vacant. We saw something very similar during the last economic crisis. And I worry about our resilience in terms of job opportunities for people in the community. We don't really have a well-stratified series of job prospects for community members. We have really good opportunities for people at the very high earning tiers who have an extraordinary amount of mobility already. So they could, if things start to look grim, move to another state, right? Miami's beautiful, but it's not the kind of place where, unfortunately, most people have really deep roots. It's a young city and continues to be young. And I applaud you guys for investing in the long-term future of our city. As someone who never wants to leave Miami, I'm really worried that we're going to have these kinds of unaddressed risks in our economic landscape. So how do we mitigate something like that, right? What do we do? And the way that I see it, things are actually really complicated. Our education system is not really built around rapid retraining. And so the old days where you could have a job where it became a career, where you would be doing that for 35, 40 years until you retired, they're largely gone, right? Those job opportunities just don't exist anymore. And so industries are born and die every year. New job paradigms develop that we just didn't know were going to be job opportunities in the past. So you look at the AI landscape today, or cybersecurity, where there's a million job shortfall. If we wait for people who are interested in those kinds of roles to finish a master's degree, it's going to be 6 years until they're able to meet that job shortfall, and it's just not reasonable to expect that. So our university system has served us very well over the last couple hundred years, right? I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. I'm very fortunate to have learned about phenomenology and hermeneutics. I don't know that that the overall future of our city should be premised on the idea of being forced to take a literature course in your first undergraduate year. I think that dependency is making us less responsive. And where we feel it the most are at the lower echelons of our economy, right? So working class people, they have the most that they are risking when they take out loans for their college education, and they're the ones who are the most exposed when the jobs that they trained for just don't exist anymore. So what am I proposing here? Two things. One, I think that we need to start seriously exploring rapid retraining systems. And so what I mean is, so in the technology world, you saw a number of these boot camps start to develop over the past, say, 10 years or so. And they're 9 to 12-week programs where you have someone who's developing a very specific skill in an intensive space that makes them immediately marketable. And that works really well in technology, but there's no reason why that couldn't be applied to other spaces. There's no reason why that couldn't be applied to construction. There's no reason why that couldn't be applied to the hospitality industry. So what I would recommend, it's something that I've talked about with different people in our city government, is to one, get an understanding of what our day-to-day job landscape actually is. So if we had a portal where everybody who has a job vacancy in our city is they're posting their job openings in the portal, we could mine that portal to know at a glance what the job opportunities in our community actually are. And we could determine where our skill shortfalls are locally. And when we see that we've got a critical shortage of people in a particular field, we could sponsor a very rapid retraining cycle to have a bespoke workforce where we can get people working very, very quickly and meet some of those unmet business needs in our community, and hopefully get people to stay here when the times get a little bit tougher, and make it so that when those real estate impacts occur, well, you've still got so many people who are earning that the overall strength of our community is not gutted, right? We'll feel the blow, but we'll be resilient enough to withstand it. So I apologize if I've stumbled over anything. I have a 6-month-old at home. She's going through a sleep regression, so if I'm not, if I miss words, then I apologize. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking towards. When we think about public safety planning at the Miami Police Department, we're thinking very broadly. We're thinking narrowly in terms of how we wind up addressing our current shortfalls. We are, like many other agencies across the country, we've had some difficulty hiring, not as much difficulty as, say, Seattle or some of our partner agencies over on the West Coast. But there are challenges. So we need to find ways to leverage technology to minimize our dependence on new hires to meet those needs. And with that, I hope that you guys are as excited about the future here as I am. I know I've painted kind of a grim picture of apocalyptic possibilities in the future. The truth is that we live and work in one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I have every morning that I drive in, and I'm able to look at the coastline, and I try to remind our officers, look around you. Sure, we start our day at the worst part of someone else's day, but it's in the most gorgeous space possible. And So I hope I haven't prattled on too long. I'm deeply appreciative of the opportunity to speak to you all today, and I don't know if there are any questions or.